Okay. Hello, and welcome everyone to the DSU Women's Collective event, Women in Social Justice, Feminism in Action panel and reception. My name is Prabjot Thundal, and I'm one of the executives of the DSU Women's Collective.
My name is Iman Abdullah, and I'm also one of the executives on the DSU Women's Collective. We will be your co-MCs for the panel today. I have the honor of introducing you to Stelómethet, Ethel, Gardiner, elder in residence, to provide a traditional territory acknowledgement to open up our event. Ethel is Stolo and a member of Squaw First Nations in BC, with a PhD from Simon Fraser University, a Master's of Education from Harvard, a Master's of Education from the University of British Columbia, and a Bachelor of Education from UBC's Native Indian Teacher Education Program. Her career in the field of education spans over 30 years and includes a passion for Aboriginal language revitalization. She has worked with Indigenous language communities across Canada, most significantly the Halikomean, Ojibwe, and Cree. In addition, Dr. Gardiner has led the design and development of unique Indigenous teacher education programs at Simon Fraser and Lakehead Universities, where she held assistant and associate professor positions respectively. At the University of Alberta, Dr. Gardiner assumed a leading role in Indigenous language education. Welcome to the stage.
Siam Siea, Ethel Squalwell Kulskutslala, Stelómethet, Til Hulmuch Squeech, Ethel Gardiner Til Hulitum Squeech. I say greetings in Halkomelim, which is my traditional language. My traditional name is Stelómethet, and I'm from the Squaw First Nation, which is out by Chilliwack. So happy to be here tonight to open this event for you and to welcome you to Coast Salish territory, specifically the territory of the Qayqayt people. And when I came into this room, I thought, wow, it just feels so at home to be here in this room, just alongside the river. For your information, we're the Stalo people, and the Stalo in our language means river, and that's with reference to what's called the Fraser River today, right out here. And I also felt very warm to see this lovely lady here welcoming us all, everyone here to this territory. And those 4 posts will be reflective of welcoming everybody from all directions, all corners of the world. I'm going to say a very brief prayer in Halkomelim, so you'll get a chance to hear a little bit of our language, the language of this territory, which is a similar language. It's not exactly the same, but similar. Please to skepsit. Ochichel siam, please to skepsit. E quamquam cha tili to salt squalwell. Holam ko eat to tilt tilawale. E quas haquilit set to siwas to sulialachwach. Chi thomasit lam kumuk stam. E quas theas muk til skaka. O Creator, I'm saying, bless this meeting. Give us good strength from our soul toward what we are to study or meet about today. It is good to remember our teachings from our ancestors. We thank you for everyone and everything, all my relations. Have a good discussion, and also welcome to the honored guests, who I'm sure will have plenty of fascinating, wonderful things to share. Thank you. Ko asai.
Thank you, Ethel, for that important and meaningful acknowledgement. We have a token of appreciation here for you.
Lovely. Thank you.
The DSU Women's Collective provides a space, a moving one, if not permanent, to the women on campus to come and get together to talk about issues we face being women and empower each other. We have our weekly coffee house where we talk about different issues each week and then go home learning something new from each other. We also occasionally host events like this one and personal safety workshops.
Our panel today is dedicated to recognizing and honoring women leaders from diverse backgrounds who have done significant work and created change in our communities. We have invited an amazing panel of women from labor, business, law, and the student movement here to share with us their journey and experience and how they've overcome barriers and struggles that they have faced as women in our society. We will hear from our panelists and then hold a Q&A at the end, and then we'll break for reception.
Today, we have Andrea Smith, founder of Sidesaddle Bikes, which is a women-focused bicycle boutique in Vancouver. And Andrea learned to fix bikes through community bike shops and worked for many happy years as a mechanic and manager at UBC's Bike Kitchen. She has also worked as a cycling advocate in cities across Canada and trained as an urban planner focused on cycling and mobility as a human right. She had a very brief career, 3 hours to be specific, as a bike career.
Originally, we had invited Irene Langsinger, the first woman president of the BC Federation of Labor, but unfortunately, she had to be in Victoria for the BC budget today. Luckily, we have Janet Andrews, who is so gracious as to step in. Janet Andrews is a Secretary-Treasurer-elect for the new Westminster and District Labour Council, representing 56,000 union members from over 100 affiliated local unions in 14 municipalities in the Lower Mainland. A proud union activist, Janet has been a member of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers Union for the past 18 years, representing members on the job working in the community. She is the chairperson of IMA and AW Local 764 Political Action and Women's Committee and serves on the British Columbia Federation of Women's Rights Committee.
Niki Sharma is a lawyer, a director of Vancity Credit Union and former chair of the Vancouver Park Board. She's deeply committed to gender equity, reconciliation, and strengthening local communities. Niki's legal practice focuses on Indigenous law, where she represents residential school survivors who were subjected to abuse during this tragic part of Canada's history. Niki serves on the board of Battered Women's Support Services and was appointed to the Women's Advisory Committee for the City of Vancouver. She's also the recipient of the Premier of the Northwest Territories Award for Collaboration and was recently honored as one of the top 50 most influential contributors to the Huffington Post.
And last but not least, we have Kalesqui Simca Marshall, a member of the Hauset First Nation and is the chairperson of the British Columbia Federation of Students, representing over 150,000 students across the province. While studying political science at Camosun College, Simca served in a number of positions, including the women's representative for the Students' Union. Before her introduction to student activism, Simca was an active member of the environmental movement on Vancouver Island. Let's get started with our panel, and now we'll pass it along to Andrea.
Set up the audio visuals here. Just thinking about it. Color looks a little weird from this side, but okay, whatever. Whatever. So can everyone hear me okay? Let me know if I fade out. So thank you so much for having me, everyone. I'm Andrea. I'm from Sidesaddle, Vancouver's women-focused, everyone welcome bike shop. We are located in East Vancouver at the intersection of Victoria and Broadway, like 2 blocks from the SkyTrain. Some of you may be familiar with the location. It used to be a Curves, you know, that like women-only gym. Super awkward. It was like carpeted space with like the machines all in a circle, so you like stared at each other while you were working out, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so I have to read this part out. This is what we do. Sidesaddle is a boutique bicycle shop for current and aspiring women cyclists. We are uniquely friendly, respectful, and knowledgeable about women's cycling needs. We offer a carefully curated selection of high-quality bicycles, accessories, and clothing. We also fix bikes and fit bikes, all while educating, empowering, and growing the community of women who ride. So that's what we do. The roots of what we do, really, we take our inspiration, if you go way, way back to when the bicycle was invented, around the end of the 19th century, it was a very big deal. The bicycle was, remember like how the car was for the 50s in America? Bicycles were like that in Europe and North America. It revolutionized personal transportation. Everybody wanted to get on one. Women immediately saw this as a very useful tool for organizing and building community and having adventures and making their world bigger. But we had a problem. It wasn't technically illegal for us to ride bikes. It was frowned upon. But it was technically illegal for us to wear pants. I'm deadly serious. I didn't know this until I started researching this history. Sorry, my PowerPoint appears to want me to go faster. I don't know why it's doing that. I'll just... So anyway, women had to organize for the right to ditch the corsets and the skirts, which were unhealthy and dangerous. It was called the rational dress movement, and it was a big fight to get the right to wear bloomers or actual pants on your bike so that you could get out there and take advantage of this amazing new transportation technology. And in fact, that's why we got our first networks of roads, was because of the bicycle, not the car. And there's even, like, it happened right near here. This fight was being fought. I took a photo of a page out of a book, but this newspaper story is reporting something that happened in Victoria, BC, a woman almost getting arrested because she caused such a stir biking around Victoria in her bloomers. But women fought the fight, and they won the right to ride their bikes and used bikes to build community and build a movement for eventual women's suffrage. Initially, I believe, for white upper-class women, but still, it was a start. And they were pretty badass, especially in Britain. Their tactics, they were very militant. They used bombs and jailhouse hunger strikes. Impressive women. So we celebrate that history of women in cycling with our shop colors. It's the purple, white, and green of the suffragette movement. And that's our shop motto, because we're all about self-determination. So the reason our shop exists, the reason there was a market niche for us there, is because, I find bike shops intimidating to go in. I think bike shops in general are a little bit intimidating, but for women, they're really not getting the job done. The League of American Bicyclists commissioned a study where they surveyed customers and staff about their experiences, women's experiences in bike shops, and the results were not very positive. So the League, in an attempt to get bike shops to step up their game for women, published a study with some best practices for inclusive bike shops. And I think that these things are relevant for bike shops, but they're also relevant for anyone who wants to make their undertakings more inclusive and appeal to more people. So the first best practice that we work around every day is to challenge assumptions about women in cycling, and that's both about us as staff people interacting with customers, never assuming what someone's limitations might be. Our customers surprise us every single day. Like, I almost never ride my bike for more than an hour, and we have a saddle fitting program, and you'll be talking to someone who really doesn't look like an extreme cyclist. She's like, my bum hurts and I need a different saddle. And you'll be like, okay, well, let's get into it. And sometimes I'll be talking to her for a while before she's like, well, it only hurts in the 3rd hour. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I never ride my bike for that long. Anyway, so it's about keeping our minds open as staff, but also about working with women to challenge their own assumptions of what their limitations might be, because often you can surpass them. You got to specifically target women. If women are the population you're wanting to serve better, you've got to no messing about. We had a whole decision-making process that we went through when we were talking about how we were going to market the shop. And we were like, should we just be implicit, like make the shop really friendly and pink, and like women will get it, like they'll get it. You know, around like gay pride, all the bank commercials have like 2 guys in them who could just be really good friends. So it's like if you're a homophobe and you're seeing that ad, you're like, those guys are really good friends. But if you're a queer person, you're like, oh, it's a gay bank. But well, anyway, we didn't want to try to do that. So we were like, we're going to just put it out there. Like, we're the women-focused bike shop. We hire women. We host events for women. And usually everyone's welcome, but women come first. And we're fine with that, and it's worked out really well for us. In terms of hiring women, that's been a real challenge because the industry is so sexist that there aren't many female mechanics. And even as a female mechanic and leader in the industry, when I've worked in other bike shops that I don't own, it's really hard to get anywhere near the tools. So we have hired women, and we had to make our own female mechanics. We sent our staff to bike mechanic school, and actually we got support from the government with a training grant for that, and we fundraised from our customers who were really cute. People came from far and wide to like add money to the jar. So yeah, and Monica got 98% on her certification exam. So this photo is from the City of Vancouver archives. This is the Terminal City Cycling Club circa 1906. I mean, the thing about it is that bike parties still look like this. So we just try to bear in mind that cycling culture definitely has a very particular flavor, and it can be pretty exclusive and intimidating if you don't have a mustache or generally look like these guys. I take this one really seriously. I think as activists, we can forget about the importance of pleasantness. Like, we're always in the struggle, like, you have to take everything very seriously. But I mean, the whole point is so that we can all have, like, live the good life and be friends in convivial spaces. So we try to keep our shop really clean. We painted everything white, which was definitely, we didn't think that through because we have to work very hard at keeping everything somewhat white. But it's totally worth it. People really like being in the space. And within a few weeks of opening up, we had a couple moms choose to breastfeed in the store, which was really gratifying because it just meant that people were feeling really comfortable making the space their own. So this is another best practice. I have a hard time relating to competitive sports. I'm kind of an indoor kid, except for cycling. And I ride my bike slow. But there is a huge gender imbalance in terms of elite athletics, and certainly in cycling, that does need to be addressed. And I really love this photo. It's from the 1970s, the Women's Tour de France, which didn't happen after the 70s for a really long time. The last couple of years, they've tried to get it going again. There just wasn't a Women's Tour de France. Apparently through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they just figured women couldn't do it. Like, dead serious. There's a documentary about it. Anyway, if you're in the Tour de France and you're really good at being in the Tour de France, you'll win certain stages of the race, and you get to wear a certain colored jersey to show the world what kind of an awesome rider you are. And this woman, with her 1970s braid, is wearing the polka dot jersey because she's the queen of the mountains. She's better than anyone else at climbing the Alps on her bicycle, which is an insane thing to do. And I find her very inspiring, and I think it's not about who's the skinniest and who's the fastest. It's about finding that point of commonality between the queen of the mountains and a woman who is learning to ride her bike as an adult, which is also really scary and hard. And they're both super inspiring. So I tried to be a joiner about this. This is a photo of has anyone ever seen the Gastown Grand Prix? Oh, okay, well, BC Super Week is a week of bike races that happen around the Lower Mainland, and they are super fun. Like, as you can see, very fast, very colorful. You can see bike racing. This one happens in Gastown on the cobblestones, like people riding like $7,000 10-pound carbon fiber bikes at 40 kilometers an hour past you while you're like eating your taco. So I had a lifelong dream because I've been watching the Gastown Grand Prix for a really long time. One of the things you can do at a bike race, they have there'll be maybe 50 laps, and everyone's trying to win the race, but within each lap, they have what are called preems, which is a little cash prize that the riders can like race for just that one lap and try to win the preem. And if you have a business, if you're a cool guy with a business, you can take your business card and throw down some money, and they'll be like, the next preem is from your business. And then the racers like race for your money. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like one day I'll have a bike shop. So it happened. I had my bike shop, I had my business card, I had like a like fresh $100 bill because I'm superstitious, and I was like, this is my lucky $100 bill. Let's do this. And I like went down there, and you're supposed to like be cool and like hang back for the first few laps, but like first lap I was up there, I was like, I'm gonna do a preem, and handed over my money and waited and waited some more. Nothing happened. I was like, that guy stole my money. He took my money and my business card. The women's race ends. It was a really exciting finish to the race. The men's race starts. I went off to eat a sad burger because I was like, the guy took my money. And then halfway through the men's race, I get all these texts, oh, awesome, Sidesaddle sponsored the men's race. They gave our money to the men. It's like they went out of their way to give our money to the men, because who would possibly want to sponsor the women's race? Anyway, we're gonna try again, but it was a bummer. So those are the ways that we're working to make our space supportive of women cyclists and supportive of women who want to be cyclists. And I guess I don't have much else to say, but to bring it back to business generally, my sister's here. I think, did you help organize this? Is that? No. Okay. Anyway, my sister. Beyond inviting you. Okay. Well, my sister, like, we come from a family of progressive nerds. Like, we're not business people. We hate capitalism. Yeah. So it's been a real detour for me getting involved in the business side of bikes. First through social enterprises, the community bike shop scene, and now with my own business. And I don't want to say that social movements have a lot to learn from corporate America. I don't want to apply the profit-seeking logic of corporate capitalism to social change. But running a business, you get to be in control if you're running a good business. There's a flow of resources and energy and people through your sphere of influence, and you get to make decisions about what happens with those things in alignment with values that you believe in. So like, these are two photos. This is like the bike shop's baby photo album. This is like the first lot of bikes arriving from Australia by way of New Jersey. That was a very exciting day. And the other photo, I don't know if you can even see it, but well, the huge truck and the huge arm, and it's dropping like lumber on the sidewalk. I was super excited because we were doing our renos and they were bringing us our giant beam. And I was like, we're captains of industry. But I'd never gotten to be able to order a giant beam before. I don't know, it's cool. So if you're willing to engage with money matters and business and project management in a competent way, I'm not saying you're gonna get rich, nor should you, but there's things to be gained from that. And so we wrote a really tight business plan, and we were really lucky to get funded by Vancity for half of the startup capital we needed. We got a loan from them, which is very unusual. Vancity was probably the only lender who would have even given us the time of day. And I think our business is important, and I think it's awesome that they funded us. And they wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't had all our ducks in a row. And then we also get to decide, for instance, how much to pay people. And we really believe in the BC Federation of Labor's $15 minimum wage campaign, and so we don't pay anyone less than 15 bucks. And we pay most people more than that, and that feels really good. And that's the kind of things you get to do when you're signing the checks. Yeah, and so I really like this quote. And I don't want to say that it's not about women specifically, because I've gone out of my way to say that it is about women specifically. But we've set up an initiative that's pretty much rooted in and guided by feminism. And I think it's turned out that it has something to offer a lot of different kinds of people. Our customer base is incredibly diverse. And here are some of our customers. And those are my nephews, giving the shop a mixed review. We'll see. Thanks, boys. So for more information, in terms of the history of feminism and cycling, Wheels of Change is like a grown-up picture book published by National Geographic. It's a great, great book. Half the Road is that documentary I was talking about that talks about sexism in professional cycling. It will make you so mad. And Why She Buys is basically a book for people who want to sell things to women. And I I think is really relevant if you're, like, I sell bikes, but if a lot of you folks probably are selling ideas, and I think it's similar. This is our, well, I told you where we are. This is our contact information. Please use it. If you're looking for a bike shop partner, bike mechanics can be good friends to have. If you're planning some sort of community event, we want to hear what you're up to. If you or your loved ones need a bike, we certainly want to hear from you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I have to say, actually, Andrea, that Bike Week, when I used to work at the airport, was our most hated week. Because you had to load large bikes, and a lot of them in a very confined space on an aircraft. So we have a difference of opinion there. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me here today. My name is Janet Andrews. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer-elect of the new Westminster District Labour Council. What that means is I take office tomorrow. So I'm succeeding a woman who has been in that position for 34 years. So I follow in some really amazing footsteps. Sister Carolyn Rice is heading off to a well-deserved retirement. So we wish her well there. I'm also with the Machinists Union, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers for the full deal, but the Machinists Union for short. I'm chair there of our Women's Committee, our Political Action Committee, and I'm our representative on the BC Federation of Labour Women's Committee as well. So I wear lots of hats. I was trying to think about the barriers and things that I encountered. And I think in my early life, I largely had it pretty easy. I went to university and I had a very supportive father. And so I didn't encounter a lot of barriers until I got out into the world. And that's where sort of reality sets in. And suddenly you're in competition with these guys that you're all in school with and everything was great. And now you're all in competition for jobs and it can get a little bit harder there. So overcoming that, I don't tend to look at the negative side. So I don't dwell on the barriers and stuff. And I would say I'm a reluctant feminist. I had some brothers say, you're a feminist, you can be on the women's committee, and I'm like, Gloria Steinem's way older than me, and burning your bra is unenvironmental. So I did come to it through another woman asking if I would be shop steward. I was working at the airport after completing my schooling, and she said, "Do you want to be a shop steward?" And I said yes. And that was the start of it for me. I had never been involved in a union, knew nothing really about the movement, but I became a shop steward. And fortunately, they provided some training. And I got to learn that to be a true unionist, you cannot be sexist, elitist, racist. You can't discriminate on the basis of gender or any other, for any other reason. And I really took that to heart. That echoed for me as a great value. That's what we aspire to as trade unionists. So it was important for me. Of course, once you put your hand up once, then they're like, great, we'll volunteer you instead of volunteering. And I was a little bit offended that some of the brothers, they were very great to me. I did meet some really great men in the movement, but that their first thought should be, great, you'll be chair of the women's committee. And I was like, I'm more than that. I can do more than that. But you do get a little bit pigeonholed. So that's one of the barriers that I think it's important to recognize, is the expectations, both your own and other people's. So I kind of broke out that a little bit, and I said, that's fine, I'll chair the Women's Committee, but I also want to be on the Political Action Committee. So I eventually ended up being chair of that committee and took that on. And I think that it's really important for women to be engaged politically as well as socially, because that's where the laws that govern us really come about. So I was very fortunate in becoming chair of the Political Action Committee. The brothers at my local really pushed me forward. They're like, if you want to do this, you do a great job, we're right behind you. And I think it's important to recognize your allies and really appreciate them. And I want to say to all the men and identifying men who are here today, thank you for being here, because our allies are important to us in the movement and outside. So these brothers pushed me forward and I took off into politics. And there I think that we can really make change because the legislation for us, especially as workers and working women and men, legislation governs everything: how safe we are at work, how much we get paid, how we can pursue our employers if they default or don't pay us or short pay us. all that is governed by laws and legislation. So it's really important to have a seat at the table. And I had a sister who was bargaining once, and she said, oh, she heard this quote, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And so I think that's something to be aware of, that if you don't take a seat at the table and speak up for yourself, you know, you might become lunch. So important to continue doing that. So as the incoming Secretary Treasurer of the New Western District Labour Council, we're very involved politically, and what we do is we work with progressive allies in New Westminster and Burnaby and 12 other municipalities in this area, basically anything outside of Vancouver and up to Abbotsford. And we work with them, like here in New Westminster, we work with Mayor Qayqayt. They were the first city in Canada to bring in the living wage. And what that means is that people who work for the city or who are contracted for the city of New Westminster will get paid the living wage, which I believe is $20.64 in the Lower Mainland right now and currently in this area. And that's important because people who are paid a living wage can afford to pay for childcare. They can afford to have shelter, have food. And these things are important because a lot of times those people then spend in the economy, and that's good for the rest of us. You know, it pays it forward, right? Because, you know, unless you're really rich and you can hoard your money offshore, generally for middle class and working people, your money goes back into the economy. So we're good. You know, we spend our money at bike shops and we do all these things. If you pay us a bit more, it's really great for the local economy. So that's as working people. These are some of the things that we support. We also really support, as I said, equality. Inequality is a really huge issue for us, whether it's working inequality, it's inequality on the job, or whether it's pay equity issues. We really want to address those, and we have that ability as unions, as a collective, a large group of people working together, voting together, we can make that kind of change. And so we work with our progressive politicians and we work in our communities to do that. Most unions, like mine, we join with food banks, or our Labour Council joins with the Protein for People project as well to make change in our communities and to give back. So we hold picnics and children's events, and we also our Labour Council held a Welcome New Canadians event last June in the Tipperary Park here with the city, and we invited refugees and new immigrants to join working people and to basically meet the neighbors. So that's what we do, and there's barriers to be faced, but I think you look at a barrier as something to overcome or get around, and not as a complete roadblock. Never stop dead. Always look for a way to kind of shape that or get around it. So that's what we try and do. And I just leave you with one sort of thought at the end of it. And we do a lot of work for, like, the living wage, as I said, and equity issues. And I think politically it's important for us to be engaged, because when you look at, you know, who, you know, politically is getting the benefit, quite often that is, you know, the richest. They say, well, the richest people are getting these tax breaks that are coming out today. Quite often, those are mostly men. So as women, we're not getting the benefit of that. And a lot of working women are single parents, or they're the head of a household. So when we have those kind of inequalities, they really do affect us as women, and it's important for us to address that. So anyway, thanks for your time today.
All right, 1 second here. Oh, sure. I'm feeling a bit short right now. Hopefully you can see my head. It's so great to be here, and I just first wanted to thank the Douglas Students' Union for organizing this, and the Women's Collective. Like, what a great thing to have you all gathered here and have this discussion. So it's a real honor to be here, and thank you for that. Yeah. So as I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking about you know, it's such a broad category, the challenges that you faced being a woman in the roles that you were, and for me, also being a woman of color. So I thought what I would do was think about it in terms of what would I say to myself at your age. I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was, but, you know, at the time in your life where you're thinking about entering and you have these ideas and these passions, what would I say to myself at that point? And hopefully we'll weave in some stories about my own experience there. So to start, I have all these things in big capital letters. Be prepared. That was the first one that I would tell myself. When you're in school and you're learning about all these ideas and you have all these passions about changing the world, there can be a real conflict between that belief and reality when you enter the workforce. We can talk about feminism, we can talk about how the way the world should be, but once you start working, you got to deal with the way the world is. So be prepared. I would tell myself that. And I'll add a couple things to it. When you encounter misogyny, sexism, racism, anything in the workforce, if you're not prepared, and even when you are prepared, it can be confusing and astonishing and really disheartening. And sometimes it's hard to identify. You go away the next day and you think, wait a minute, was that what I thought it was? And so I think that I would tell myself that, be prepared. Unconscious bias is real. You will face it. It shows up in a lot of ways, sometimes very overtly, but oftentimes not. And that is hard. I think that one of the things that I always go back to in my head is we spend a lot of time in school. We spend a lot of time trying to reach our goals by thinking we got to learn about how to do this, that, and this to get where we want to go, do this extracurricular activity, all of that. But nobody tells us how to deal with that stuff. I can't remember, maybe it's different now, but even just an hour of my time in school telling me, when you enter the workforce, you're going to encounter this stuff. This is what it looks like. This is how to identify it. This is tools that you can have to move around it, to deal with it, to make sure that you're not kind of crouched in the corner or removing yourself from that situation. And I think that's a real problem, because as I was talking about unconscious bias, we all have it. We never talk about it. We never talk about how to work through it. And the other thing is bullies. And I think I was thinking about this a lot just recently in my law practice, is that there are those people that you will encounter. I would tell myself this at that time, that, when they were in school, they started to just like throw big temper tantrums, push people around, do whatever, and they realized they got their way. 80% of the time it worked. And these people show up and will show up in your workforce. They will show up in your life in whatever you do. And you see the President of the United States, a great example of that, right? Those strategies work and you will face that. I often think about, as women, how we're dealing with structures that were made by men. And I practice law. And if you think about law, it's basically a conflict resolution mechanism that was designed, created, and even like the structures of our work environment by men since the beginning of law, right? So as a woman, when you enter that, how you resolve conflicts in that space, the partnership model and how it benefits certain people, all of those things may not be something that you would do. It would have been designed if women were at least 50-50 at the table since the beginning. And those are just the realities. So I put all this stuff under the heading, be prepared. The next thing that I would tell myself is be supported. I have some experience of running campaigns, and I remember the first time I did locally in Vancouver, I put my name forward for the local campaign a couple years ago, more than a couple. And the first thing that people said about me was that she was a South Asian female candidate. And I remember when I saw that and I was thinking about it, I was like, I feel like I'm a lot of things, right? I've done a lot of different things. I feel like a lot of different things have come in my life, but that's the one thing that was talked about over and over again. And I remember it never really sat comfortably with me. Not that I'm not proud of that. If you leave aside the term South Asian and the problems with that, I could talk to you about that, because it's a huge area. My family's from India. But, in public life, it kind of magnifies racism, but also categorization. That stuff's around all the time. In the campaigns I've run, in the time that I've been before people, you put yourself out there. And, I was struck by the woman, I don't know if you'd following the MP that was in the House of Commons reading out all those things that she faced, and she was Muslim. I've definitely encountered that not only in my face, but also in writing. And it's tough. You put your armor on, you face it, but it hurts. So the one thing that I can tell you that I've gotten, the most out of is my support group. And those are usually other women of color that are experiencing it too. And that has been immeasurable to me in terms of trying to navigate through this and feeling lifted rather than dragged down by it. So that would be another one of my advice. And really creative ideas come out of it. And I really love this one. And this was in a story about women that were in Obama's White House years ago, so when they first were elected. So kind of the behind the scenes people, and there were not a lot of women at that time in that room. So the women that were at that table were feeling like their ideas were not listened to. So you may have heard this, the amplification method, which I love, right? And that was just women thinking about what's our strategy to combat this. So they came up with the idea of supporting each other in these meetings. So if somebody came up with an idea, they would amplify it. They would say, Ethel came up with this great idea about this. And so they would support each other in the room. And by that, they were getting recognition, but they were also feeling lifted up. So I think there's all those different ideas you can apply to your situation, but I've gotten so much out of just being supported by those people that are around me that can add that kind of not only support, but problem solving. The next thing I would tell myself is be resilient. I think life is often just as much about how you deal with getting knocked down than, if not more, than how you deal with winning. Because you will get knocked down. It's the way it is. There'll be bullies. There'll be all these people that will say, they'll drag you down. They'll make you feel, like you don't fit in or whatever it is in that situation. And how you deal with that will be the measure, in my mind, of your success. Disappointment can be hard. People that have experienced racism, it's hard. It's a barrier that you can't control or move, or it feels like it's insurmountable. There's a certain type of resiliency that you have to develop, because it's the way the world is, that helps you deal with that. And, I think the closer you get to those lines of power, the more you will get poked and the more you will get dragged down. I'm realizing this is sounding really negative. I'm being very brutally honest with myself as I think about this. And kind of the last thing, which I'll leave you with, is that there's no substitute for hard work. Like, the reality is that as a woman of color, you have to work harder to be recognized. You have to put extra time in. It's been my experience, and unfortunately, I think that things are changing very slowly, and sometimes they seem to be moving backwards. And I don't see that. At least now has changed. You have to work harder. And it may be frustrating because you'll see people floating to the top faster than you sometimes. And it'll feel disheartening and all those things that I told you about. And you'll maybe think that putting your head down and working and you'll get this recognition. It may not come, but I think that there's no substitute for putting your head down and just doing the work. So those are my tips for resiliency, or moving past the barriers that, I've certainly faced in my life, and I hope that's of use to you. All right, thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks to the Students' Union here for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to share a bit about my experience and the work that I do. So my name is Simca Marshall, and I am a member of the Howzit First Nation. Has anyone been to Tofino? That's where my people basically are. I grew up on Vancouver Island. And I've been living in Vancouver for the past 3 years. So I'm the chairperson of the BC Federation of Students, which is essentially just a provincial-sized students' union. We represent students at 14 institutions, and Douglas College is one of them. So I just want to talk a little bit about kind of my experience growing up, giving a little bit of my history, because that's a really important part of kind of how I got here today. My mom is from the Hausla First Nation, and my dad is from the Esquimalt First Nation. And on both my grandparents on both sides of my family both went to residential school, and my mom has 11 siblings, and 9 of them went to residential school as well. So that trauma from residential school is something that I know about. It's something that the intergenerational trauma from that is something that I have lived. And honestly, our family's time during that, our family history being that deeply rooted in residential school means that it's something that is pretty normalized for us. It's something that we talk about at the dinner table. At Christmas dinner, we talked about my grandma's experiences in residential school. We talked about, my great-great-grandma losing her first family to smallpox. We talked about, things like that. So it's something that is just a real part of my history. But with that said, experiencing that and living that daily and seeing the effects of that on my family members that are really close to me. Growing up, there'd be times where I would feel, pretty disheartened, pretty angry, and pretty upset that, I would be put in the situation that my loved ones would be, forced into situations like that. But having this be a regular topic in my life and having really strong women in my family, like my mom and my aunt, really helps me see the resilience in my people, and it's really helped me see the resilience in myself. My mom and my aunt right now are working on kind of breaking the barriers within our own community. I come from a really patriarchal community where it's only men that are the leaders, and my mom and my aunt are working so hard to kind of break that barrier and really try to break those stereotypes. So I'm really privileged in the sense, not in the sense that I benefit from a system, but in the sense that I have had access to some really important role models in my life and people who hold some really sacred knowledge and have passed down their teachings to me. So I went to Camosun College. I was a political science student. My first semester, I really hated it. I hated school so much. I hated that I had been removed from my high school and all my friends were going to different schools and I had to start from scratch, and I'm not really good with change either. So I also just found the whole thing really challenging. So I kind of just moped my first semester a lot. And then I finally, I don't really remember how I stumbled upon it. There is a lounge for the Indigenous students on campus. And it was on the 3rd floor of one of the buildings that I had all my poli-sci classes in. And I stumbled upon it one day and found out that it was this place that you could actually hang out in. So I thought that was fine. Eventually I realized I met people from the Indigenous Students Caucus. They were called the First Nations Student Association at the time. And one of them was actually my cousin, which is pretty funny. But I became a part of the collective, and so we would meet weekly, and that really helped me in my time through my first year, which was pretty challenging. But just being a part of a group of people that shared my same experiences. And then eventually someone from the collective convinced me to run for the Students' Union, which I didn't really know what it was. But I kind of had a history of working with an advocacy work. So I was pretty deeply involved in the environmental movement on Vancouver Island. I really liked arguing with my family members because my family grew up in my family's from Ucluelet and Tofino, and both of those are resource towns. So my family is deeply rooted in logging and fishing, fish farming and stuff like that. So I loved being able to go home at Christmas and argue with them and use all these statistics that I learned from these random environmental organizations that I volunteered with. It made me feel really smart. But anyways, so kind of having that type of personality, I decided to go for it. Didn't really know what was involved with what a students' union really did. I was hopeful that I would get to kind of put some of the skills that I learned from those environmental organizations into play. I was the women's representative for a time there, and then I became the external executive, which is kind of similar to what a chairperson would do. it just kind of started snowballing. I just like really couldn't stop. There's like, I had finally been introduced to like a really tight-knit community of super passionate people, and I was learning more and more about kind of like activism around education. And I was kind of like, people would be like, yeah, tuition fees are so high, and they'd be talking about like how the post-secondary education system is like basically like really broken right now, and I'd be like, yeah, right, that is kind of bullshit. Like, we do have to pay so much for school, and that's ridiculous. And then I started off as the Aboriginal representative for the province, and I sat on our provincial executive of the BC Federation of Students, and now I am here. And for the past 2 years, we have had an all-woman at-large executive, which has been pretty amazing. And we've had three women have been Indigenous. So I've just been surrounded by really, really badass women in this movement, and they have taught me so much, and that's been pretty amazing. To talk a little bit about what our organization does, so the BC Federation of Students provides advocacy, representation, and services for students to try and make students' lives a bit easier. So we run campaigns around affordable education. So we have a campaign on adult basic education, which is like high school upgrading courses. And, the provincial government made a massive funding cut to ABE back in 2014, and also changed a policy to make it so that institutions could charge fees on them. So now those courses are no longer free, and high school upgrading courses are something that's so essential because it gets your foot in the door to get a job, to stay in the job market, to continue on to a college or university program, and it really does represent. We see an overrepresentation of our most marginalized community members that depend on those courses. And a lot of those folks are single parents, a lot of those folks are Indigenous people, and new Canadians. So we run campaigns around that and affordable education in general. So trying to tackle the issue of student debt, advocating for lower tuition fees, for grants for students, because currently BC offers the lowest amount of student financial aid, and just really advocating for accessible education no matter what your background is or how much money you make. And these are all issues that just like how Indigenous people, there's an emphasis on the effect that they feel by, tuition fees being put on adult basic education, or by tuition fees, for programming in general being so high. But that's also something that women really feel greatly and, at a greater rate than other students. And something that actually just happened like a few hours ago. So today the provincial government announced their budget for the upcoming year. And one of our campaign asks that we've been working on for a number of years, and we've been kind of like leading the charge in this, is currently in British Columbia, students pay the highest rate of interest on student loans in all of Canada, which is pretty absurd. So, if you are too poor to pay for school upfront, then you have to take out money. You have to borrow money to pay for school, but then the interest you pay on that is so high that, if you take out like a $30,000 loan, you're paying like $10,000 in interest. So it actually makes the cost of education far less affordable, and you're paying more than the person who can actually pay upfront. So we've been calling for, the government to take action on that and to eliminate interest on student loans. And today in their budget, they announced a reduction in interest on student loans, which, is pretty exciting. And it is a really good step forward. It's not, obviously not going to end student debt overall, but it is going to save like millions of dollars for students. And so I'm really excited to have heard that announcement today, because it is encouraging and, inspires a little bit of hope that maybe there's a bit more room for collaboration, and that, the lives of students is going to be a little bit easier. So it's a good first step. Basically, they're kind of, just to resonate what some folks were already saying, it's not easy being an Indigenous woman in kind of like this position, and it's not easy being, you know, a woman in general. And the political landscape right now is pretty bleak, not just in this country, but, you know, we really feel the effects of what's happening, you know, down in the United States pretty greatly. But you know, throughout all of the kind of crap that I get thrown my way, you know, when I was like in one of my poli-sci classes, whether it be, I had my professor just call on me whenever there was anything related to like Indigenous people in general, and I had like no idea what he was talking about, even though I just kind of wanted to like keep my head down and just be in class. Or, you know, becoming kind of like the token Indigenous woman that worked in the environmental organization, that all my coworkers would come to me and ask me questions about like land claims, and like I'm not an expert in everything Indigenous. I'm an expert in my own experience. I could talk your ear off about the Ahousaht people and my family history and like my own family's experience with residential school, but you know, just because it's my identity doesn't mean that I know everything about it. And I think we can all, we've all kind of had similar experiences, no matter, you know, depending on what our identities were with that. So kind of going through those type of things, what's kept me sane and grounded throughout that is kind of remembering that things like sexism and racism is something that is learned, and that people aren't born that way. And so that means that there's an opportunity to educate people. That leaves us a little bit of room to educate those folks. And it's important for us to remember to be patient and to not attack people, because everyone is coming from a very different experience and from a very different background. And as frustrating and as angering as it can be, kind of being that person who is, you know, experiencing that like head on a lot of the time, we have to remember to be patient with each other, because that's the only way that we're going to get that education through. And that's the only way that we're going to start to tackle these issues, so that we can have safe spaces for everyone, so that people can go to work safely and go to school safely. And yeah, that's why education is like particularly so important to me, and I'm so passionate about it. So I really do believe that we need to keep working together, you know, calling on affordable education, calling for, you know, an actual childcare plan, calling for, you know, all of these issues with the goal of having more of an equal and just society. And we really need to make sure that we continue to listen to each other, to give space to each other, because we're going to learn from each other on kind of like our journey of trying to reach these goals. And we can start to tackle some of these serious systemic issues that our marginalized groups, like Indigenous people, like New Canadians, and like poor people are facing today. So thanks so much for giving me the time and space to share my story with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists for sharing your stories with us this afternoon. We now have time for a small discussion and Q&A. So if anyone has a question, they can just raise their hand and go ahead.
Yes.
Kind of off the cuff here. Both Andrea or Andrea?
And whichever, but
Okay. And Janet, you both, well, you had difficulty finding women bike mechanics. Janet, did you find that when you were working as the shop secretary, shop steward?
Yeah, I worked at the airport actually. My job was at the airport, and yeah, there's barriers to accessing.
So my question is what do you two feel like would be a logical step, or how best could we help alleviate gender barriers in the workforce between certain industries and sectors like that are traditionally male dominated? How do we open that up to everyone and anyone?
I think, sorry, can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. I think it is an issue. I know my own experience, I worked at the airport. We're the aerospace worker, part of the Machinists Union. But I do know a lot of sisters that work on the docks. in the trades like electrical, plumbing, and it can be very difficult, and it can be very hostile. And I think to help those women, just to have a safe space to, to call out bad behavior in other men is very helpful. Even in my shop, we had a circumstance where one of our female members was being harassed by another member. And I had heard rumors of this behavior and came across in the lunchroom someone making remarks. And I said, "Excuse me, would you like to repeat that?" And even just that is usually enough to say, what did you say, and are you willing to repeat it again? But I think that's what's really helpful for us is for men to be aware of, I've been called girl, I've been patted on the ass, and you might think that's friendly, but it's not. It's actually very hostile for me in the workplace to have that. So I think just an awareness and to call it out in other men when you see it. We just that much will make the space welcoming for us as women, because we're just like you. We just want to do a great job. We want that opportunity. We want to take that paycheck home to be able to support them and to have pride in our work. So just to have that space at work is great, and our allies are very much appreciated. All of the brothers in the union, all of the men that I've worked with, and my experience tends to be very male dominated. I grew up in fishing as well. So I grew up in fishing, and I moved on to the union movement, which can be it can be quite male dominated as well. But I've really appreciated the men who have encouraged me, who have seen me put my hand up and not looked past me, but have looked at me and said, "Hey, sister, if you're willing to do that, we'll put you up for that training. We'll give you that opportunity. You can lead that, that program." So yeah, no, and thank you for asking. Do you want to add?
Oh no, that's solid. Nailed it.
Yeah.
So it's a similar question along the same vein. When you have a male-dominated industry, my husband works in packaging design and stuff, and he has had the opportunity now to hire 5 people, and 4 of them have been male, and we've talked about it. And the problem that he faces is that he doesn't have women applying. And so to try and even thinking of, affirmative action, like, okay, we are going to search through and find these, how, Andrea, like this is something for you that you have gone through. How do you encourage women, like where do you start to make things equal? I mean, other than my daughter, who are like, okay, you are doing metal shop, I don't care what you want, but how do we change industries that are already
It's a huge challenge. This has been, for me professionally in the bike industry, has been one of my pet issues that I've taken on in the community bike shop world, which are people familiar? Do people know what I mean when I say that? Like, they're social enterprise bike shops. So they're owned by a nonprofit, run by a board. They have lots of volunteers. They recycle bikes, teach people to fix their own bikes. They're progressive. And usually in those environments, it's assumed that they're not sexist. But they can often be quite bad as well, and we would be in a situation where we aspired to have a gender balance, a gender spectrum on the staff. And time after time, we'd go through a hiring process and end up with another dude. And they were all lovely dudes. And I was like, there's too many of you guys. And so through a series of battles, like, you have to be really careful. So we realized that, A, we weren't getting the female applicants that we needed if we wanted to have a good diverse staff. So we set funding aside, we set money aside to actually pay women to learn to be bike mechanics on the job. If you're serious about it, you have to just fund the training, because even in my experience growing up, and our family's pretty progressive, but women there's whole worlds that women tend not to get exposure to when they're younger. Like, I didn't know how to hold a screwdriver when I started out, and like, I was encouraged to hold screwdrivers, I guess, but it's because of socialization and, I don't know, various reasons. Also, in recruitment practices, I have noticed this probably because of socialization, and not to stereotype, but I do notice commonalities. If you're interviewing for a position as a bike mechanic and you're stressed out, it's July, like tune-ups are backed up for 6 weeks, you need someone who can come in and wrench right now. If you interview 4 men, even the ones who on their resume it says they've never worked in a bike shop, you're like, well, can you bleed disc brakes? They're like, yeah, I can do that. Can you really? Yeah. Can you, do you know how to overhaul a campy shifter? Oh yeah, no problem. They're lying. Men consistently overstate their competencies, and if you leave them with that campy shifter to overhaul it, you won't hear from them again for 2 hours. They will just sit there trying to figure it out themselves. Whereas women, if you get a bunch of women in the shop or you're interviewing a woman, you're like, well, can you bleed brakes? What she'll say, even if she knows how to do it and has taught other people how to do it, is she's like, well, I'm pretty good at it. I've still got things to learn. So if you're in a recruitment situation, the men are going to outcompete all the time unless you have these filters on. And the other thing is that in a technical work environment, I've noticed, everyone's different, and you can't completely generalize, but if there's 3 women working in the bike shop and there's 3 bikes in the stands, all of the women are working on all of the bikes at the same time. They're checking in with each other, they're trading ideas, they're collaborating. 3 men working on those 3 bikes, the shop is quiet because they're each beavering away on their own work. But what that does is, in a mixed gender work environment, it makes the women look unsure and incompetent because they're like, is this derailleur compatible with this cassette? And you're like, yeah, it is. And she knew that. She was just checking. But in a mixed gender work environment, that looks like weakness. And so you've got to kind of be really watching out. I did most of a degree in women's studies, and I have this sort of academic deconstructivist, but then sort of theory of gender equality and gender injustice. But then when you're in an actual work environment trying to make things be cool, you have to kind of be more pragmatic and actually kind of stereotype sometimes to kind of run against these problem dynamics. Anyway, sorry, rambled.
Yeah, and I think I agree with all of that. And I would just add one thing, that there is actually statistics around that sort of a man saying, yeah, I can do it. And they say that it takes a woman, and we look at it particularly with politics, if you ask a man to run, for office, yeah, I can do it. A woman will have to be asked 6 or 7 times. Oh. That's the average to do something. Yeah, so this is so it is actually, and it's not that we can't do it. Again, absolutely, it's just that we work differently, and our brains work differently. We approach problems differently. So I think that filter, and I think if and to the point of training people of your own, I think that you can go into schools if you have a particular niche. You can go to the different colleges that teach sort of what practically applies to your field, and you can actually talk with the students. Hey, we're looking to hire someone, and you can be mentoring them through to the end of school, and that's a way to encourage that as well. But again, just asking the question and starting out with that as your lens is a huge step forward for us.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Marshall and Sharma. From environmental activism to groups in school, you talked about how it was a catalyst for success in your fields. And I just wanted to ask, how do you find community, and where do you start?
I would suggest that you start with whatever you're passionate in. That's kind of how I did it. I don't really know how I stumbled upon the environmental movement, but I was in grade 8 or 9 when I think me and my best friend were decided to go to a rally one day, and then we were kind of we agreed with what they were talking about, and then we were able to kind of help build a community there in the networks that we were surrounded with going throughout high school and stuff like that. So I really think, for me, it's pretty simple. It's just following what you're passionate in or what you believe in, because then you can find a group of like-minded people and really build on that community.
I don't know that I have much to add to that. I would just totally agree with you. I think the way I've been able to find community is following what my passions are, but also I think sometimes you have to be a little active about it. If you do need that support group, and you're feeling like you're not getting it from whatever environment you're in, you do need, I think it's to seek it out. So like for example, in law, there's a mentorship programs that you can enter, so people can provide you with the support you need and asking the questions that you want, because there's always so much to learn, and people that have done it before usually have good advice. So thanks for the question.
We have a few hands. Yeah, Telka.
I'm just going to stand up so I can see you all. There was a lot of discussion about helping people learn who maybe were raised in different ways. But have any of you found any value in working with the allies that you have in the workplaces or experiences that you've had? And are there any interesting experiences you have to share about that?
Actually, something that I was going to talk about, thanks for asking that question, that I forgot to, was the idea of allies like you're talking about. I've really benefited from being in situations and not having to be the one that raises it all the time, because I find that personally is very isolating, and people start to, roll their eyes at the person that's always raising the issue. So to some success, actually, I've been thinking about it differently lately, about actively finding the white male, or the person that has is not from that perspective, to bring it up in a situation. And I have to say that works sometimes a lot better than being the person that always is saying it. So I don't think that, in my experience, it doesn't happen accidentally. I think you have to cultivate those discussions with those people, and sometimes be pretty strategic about if you're encountering a problem in an environment, about who to talk to and who to encourage to be an ally. At least for me, it's never happened naturally in some of those kind of more intense situations. But
I feel like I have a business partner who I should have given a shout out to, and he's a guy, and he does a lot of my dirty work for me in terms of bringing up difficult topics and stuff with people, because it's different coming from an ally, for sure.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, it's the allies are there, and I think it's how you approach. For within my union, like our executive board, when I came onto it, I was one of two. So when I got to be chief steward of my bargaining unit, I got a seat at the table at that time, and there was two of us. And then we sort of encouraged that, we got doing stuff, and then we encouraged a couple other women to take a seat at the table as well and run, and they got elected. But they got elected with the support of the other men at the table. And those allies were there, and some of them knew themselves to be allies, and some of them you needed to educate a little bit about hey, I want to run for this, or hey, you know what, the sister would be really great in this job, why don't we ask her, and they sort of wouldn't think of it, but once you raise it, and if you raise it in a strategic way, then they're like, yeah, sure, that's great. They'll be right behind you. But I think that and again, getting back to sort of how women work a little bit differently, we don't always think to ask as well, right? And you're crossing that gender barrier when you step out. But to kind of be brave and do it. You have to keep the goal, the end result in mind. How badly do you want to get there? And that will form kind of your steps.
I don't know. Do you remember the I Don't Know More movement that happened a few years ago? Or I guess it's still happening, but it peaked a few years ago. So that happened in 2012 or 2013, where we were seeing a movement of Indigenous community members and leaders all across the country who were coming together and having direct actions. All across the country. And a really important part of that movement was our allies. And I think that it's so important to ensure that we can't do this alone. We need our allies to be there. And, I think that's a good point there's a lot of times where we're going to have to be helping to educate those allies as well. But I think they're a really important component of these movements that and these sectors that we are all working in. And as an ally, just being sure that you're open and that its intention is really important. When it comes to these things, and so going in there with an open mind and being willing to listen, and it's allies are really important.
Yes. Another question. Do any of you cry or do you tend to be emotional, and how do you deal with that in a business situation or in a professional situation where your thoughts and your opinions are very valid, but you are a shaking, crying mess? Is that?
That's just time. I have to say that's time and experience. When we had a first blow up, I think I was a shop steward for only a year before I was elected chief steward there was about 90 people that I was responsible for interacting with the employer with. And I think I was chief steward for all of a month when there was a blow up over an issue. And I had senior people tracking me down about, you better, blah, 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 and men and women, and some of them I was considerably younger, so I was dealing with youth as well as gender. And I think it's something that over time has gotten easier. And I know that's not the greatest advice. And just kind of steeling yourself to, and I think also knowing the ground before you go in. I think that it's worse if you get blindsided. So if you kind of look at the situations that you go into, if it's a board meeting or if it's a union meeting or if it's an election or if a meeting with a politician or maybe someone who's hostile, we're lobbying someone who's hostile to our cause, to know going in that there might be a bit of a fight and to kind of steel yourself. And at the end of the day, you do the best that you can do. And sometimes we're emotional and sometimes, we cry, but I tend not to be a crier, when I'm upset. I usually cry when I'm happy, so that's kind of been a benefit to me. But yeah, you kind of, I think being prepared in advance has, for me, been the best solution for that.
I'm curious to hear from the lawyer.
Thanks, Andrea. So I have cried actually in front of people in a work environment. And I kind of struggle with this whole idea where sometimes tears are pretty appropriate. And it kind of goes back to the idea that a lot of our institutions have been designed and implemented by men, right? And, some legal issues, sometimes they're, your client's crying and there's a reason, it's an emotional issue, and, I do. And I guess I don't see that as a weakness, but I understand your point.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But, I have this wonderful thing where as soon as I step into one of my instructors' offices, even if it's to say hi, I just cry. And they're used to it, and it's good here. I love Douglas. We're good. But how do you address it when it is a professional situation and you're saying, I'm sorry, I'm crying, right? Like, what do you... I'm just wondering how you guys, you're very successful. You just go with it?
And I think not being afraid, if you really need some time to compose yourself, saying, you know what, just give me a moment, I'll be right back. I've done that. I've had to leave the room, right? You're just things can get very heated when you're talking about someone's filing a grievance, they've been disciplined or whatever, and or someone's being harassed. I've had some very hard discussions where it's been about bullying and harassment, and this member is really suffering, and it's very hard to hear them recount this. So I think that there's absolutely you can step out, say, give me a moment, I'll be right back. And I think that, again, to not apologize when things are hard. I mean, depends to what the topic is. But I think there's nothing wrong with reacting, in certain situations where it's called for.
Yes. This will be our last question.
Great speeches by all of you. My question is a bit off topic, but it's a bit related to, I've been noticing this thing since the last 2-3 years, the media establishment all over in the Western world, specifically from Europe till North America, they've had a very clear bias towards people who do not share their opinion. What I mean by that is that they ridicule people who come on their channels and they make fun of them, and it's like not to all of them, but I've seen that, and a lot of my friends, like everyone, like my question is a bit general to all of you, and I've asked it to a lot of people, like just to take the recent victory of Mr. Trump down in the US, a lot of people were surprised, but if you go and talk in the heartland of the US, the mid-states in the US, a lot of people actually support him in spite of what the media has said. I was recently checking, he got 61 million votes in the US. I agree, he has said a lot of, I'm not a Trump apologist or something like that. I agree, he has said a lot of negative things, but in spite of that, the man got 61 million votes. He's got support from women, immigrant communities. I mean, it's like quite shocking, but when I turn on the news channels, like most of them, not all of them, but they have a very biased approach. So in this environment where like we are moving away from a society where genuine debate does not take place anymore. The moment you question an existing narrative, people immediately call you a name and your career gets destroyed. So people are afraid at times to speak their mind. So Mr. Trump happened, before Mr. Trump, Brexit happened, and Miss Marine Le Pen in France, she's expected to be the next president of France. Mr. Geert Wilders in Netherlands, all of these people have one thing in common, which is that they are more in touch with the common man. And what I feel right now is that our society is generally heading towards our politicians, they are not in touch with the common man or woman. So like what I mean to say is that how do we address this issue? Being students, that independent thinking is very critical. Like the ability to accept an opinion even though we don't agree with that opinion. How do we tackle that media bias?
Thank you for your question. It's actually really interesting, really topical as well. And in our office, we've had a lot of discussions about the U.S. election, as everyone else is. And I really think that this is what we should be taking from this election is this is an opportunity for us to critically look at ourselves, especially people who are on the left, because something that we are getting stuck in is not being able to have those genuine debates with people who disagree with us, right? Is not giving them the space, and instead of going at it from attacking someone because they have a differing opinion, we need to ask them why do you feel like that? Because a lot of that stuff is based in fear. And I really do believe that part of the reason why someone like Trump won is because he really spoke to people's fears, and he also spoke to people's values. And that's also a whole other political analysis that we could do of why Trump won, which is also very interesting. But I really do think that this is a time for folks on the left in particular to really critically analyze themselves and how they're carrying out their messaging and how they are educating people. Because I think that we are forgetting that everyone comes from a different education level, and we get stuck in our own academic thoughts and little world of how we describe all of these things to be, and we are forgetting how to just talk to working class people. And I think that's what we're failing to do. And I really hope that we can start having more discussions or have a topic like this come up in discussions where we're in rooms together, so that we can think about, we can, one, realize it, because I don't think a lot of us are really self-aware of something of this to be the phenomenon that's happening. But I hope that we can have more discussions about it so that we can move away from that direction.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I feel like we could have a whole panel on that topic. So one thing that's been occurring to me lately is this: I have the same fear as you, that we are not able to talk across differences very well anymore. And certainly for myself, I think that I come from people that are self-identify as progressives. And right now in my mind, I'm really challenging what that word means. And are you progressive if you sit around and talk to people that think the same way as you? And is that progress? And I don't think it is. And I don't think, stepping outside of our communities and talking to the people that don't agree with us and maybe coming to some kind of a progress, right? About where we're pushing, that's really progress, right? And I feel like I know I've been guilty of that before, and probably will be in the future. But it's a real danger, because if there's no ability to talk to people, then you see who gets to rise out of that, right? Like what rises in the midst of that. And that's a real challenge. So that's what I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one thing that we've noticed too in the labor movement is that you can get disconnected from your members, and especially the further away you get from what we call the shop floor, right? You're not at work every day. I used to look my members in the eye every day, so you could have a good gauge. And one of our brothers, actually from Montreal, we were talking about this, and he said, well, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should be listening as much as we talk, if not more. Right, so twice as much. And I think that listening component, because it's not only hearing what that person has to say, but it also makes them feel validated. We used to have a member, and he was forever coming up with it would make things better if we did this. And usually his angle was that it would make life better for him, and usually at the expense of someone else. But I had someone say one time, why do you listen to him? It's like, well, if I don't hear what he has to say, then no one does. And maybe he goes directly to management and proposes this on his own off the cuff, and then I'm dealing with a bigger mess. So sometimes people just need to be validated. Now, having said that, there's certain things that absolutely should never be validated, racist thoughts, sexist, these sorts of things that are out there right now, particularly, that deserves no validity. But I think that when we're talking to people that don't share our opinions, it's very important to listen to them, because they usually have a reason for it. And sometimes if we listen long enough, their reasons are actually run very close to our own. It's just that they come at it from a different angle. And the last thing I want to say about the election, and this is sort of my own personal thought in the States, is I don't take it so much as a woman that Hillary Clinton lost. I don't think it was necessarily as a woman, but I'm old enough to remember when she was First Lady. And she was one of the, if not the most vilified First Ladies of her time. And I think that she carried a lot of baggage. So I think for us to look at that election and say, well, how did all those people vote for Donald Trump? I think you need to really factor that there's a lot at play there. And lastly, for the media piece, I really make a point of seeking out alternative media. And obviously not a steady diet of Fox News, but every once in a while you have to listen to, the Toronto Sun or whatever, Ezra Levant's. You need to kind of, where is that coming from, and think about it a little bit.
I guess I get the last word. I'll bore you with an anecdote. Just in response to this issue, I get The Economist in my stocking every year for Christmas because I'm a huge nerd, and I like the articles. Like, it'll be like 6 pages of really solidly researched content, and then 1 paragraph that's like minimum wages suck. But all the information was valuable, and you don't have to agree with the editorial slant. So I read The Economist, and every year they have this nerd contest for where people predict what is going to happen. The readers of The Economist predict what is going to happen in the world, because I guess that's what the people all have in common, is we're all trying to figure it out. And the guy who won last year got everything right. He called Brexit, he called Trump, he called all this other crazy stuff, and they were like, you genius guy, like, how did you do that? And he was like, it's easy, I just read media from both sides of the political spectrum. And I don't know, I felt really surprised by the things that happened this year, but I realized I've just really been hiding in an echo chamber. And you gotta tune in to the other side occasionally.
Thank you all for the great discussion. It's always awkward standing up here and there's crickets in the audience. And thank you again to our amazing panelists, our guests as well. We have a materials table set up in the back of the room with our consent campaign and also an email list if you're interested in joining the DSU Women's Collective at future events. We have some refreshments and snacks in the kitchen provided by Chartwell's Catering. And we have a few little gifts for our speakers. And thank you again for joining us today. We hope that you have a great evening.
I guess should we tuck this back into the holder?